What's up, guys? Welcome to another video, and in this one I'm going to be talking about the Elemental Shaman and giving my first impressions on the class design in Legion. I think that from a PvP standpoint, this is a very interesting class, one of the more interesting classes on the alpha, and I think that the way it's played is very diverse and has a lot of opportunities to, reward skillful players for pressing the right buttons. And I want to bring my points on the positive aspects and the negative aspects as well. I think that from a damage standpoint, it's very interesting because some certain abilities at certain times, depending on your procs, does more than other abilities. And with the new resource called Maelstrom that scales from 0 to 100, much like a rage bar, it's interesting because it allows you to build up and work towards something while you're playing the game, work towards getting 100 Maelstrom and then exploding that Maelstrom onto a target with Earthshock or something and doing a huge amount of damage. Because how it works is you build up Maelstrom with Lava Burst or Chain Lightning or Lightning Bolt or Ice Fury, which is a talent that empowers your Frost Shocks. And once you get to 100 Maelstrom, you can spend it how you want to, whether that be heals for empowered heals. You can spend it with Earthshock, which does a huge amount of damage and spends all your Maelstrom. You can use it with Frost Shock, which slows the target and does a little bit more damage when you spend more Maelstrom, or you can spend it on Flame Shock, which increases the duration of Flame Shock based on how much Maelstrom you spend. So with that being said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the procs that are available, and I think it's really cool because it allows you to have to make a decision in your head whether you want to use Lightning Bolt or you want to use Lava Burst, and when it's best to use your offensive cooldowns, like your Stormkeeper, which is your artifact ability, which empowers your Lightning Bolt at a certain amount of time whenever you have certain procs. And let's go ahead and jump into that. So if I were to Flame Shock 4 different targets, I obviously get a lot of these procs, right? I get a ton of Lava Surge procs, I'll get Power of the Maelstrom procs. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is, get 100 or so Maelstrom. As you can see, I've got Power of the Maelstrom, which is a pretty big deal. I'm going to go ahead and pop my Storm Elemental, my Stormkeeper, cast 3 Lightning Bolts, which does a crazy amount of damage. And then I can cast Earthshock and dump all of my Maelstrom at the end there. Obviously, this isn't the perfectly correct rotation, but it's just kind of a feel of what you do whenever you decide that you want to do a lot of damage. And having that Power of the Maelstrom proc, which increases your Lightning Bolt damage by 300% almost, and then using Stormkeeper and increasing it by each Lightning Bolt that hits them by 200% for 3 Lightning Bolts, it really can do a lot of damage. And that's kind of the point of this, is to show exactly how diverse it is. My one complaint, though, for how the class has been designed in terms of Maelstrom is that I don't necessarily agree with the Frost Shock and the Flame Shock taking Maelstrom away and rewarding you with a longer duration or increased damage. So let's talk about Flame Shock first. The reason why I don't agree with the Flame Shock one is because part of playing Elemental Shaman is the fun of keeping up multiple Flame Shocks on multiple targets and having to balance in your head exactly what the timers are on each person and keeping the dot up so that you can generate Lava Surge procs. And I feel like it's kind of a cop-out whenever you have to work in Maelstrom, and it kind of takes away from your rotation and what you really want to do with the Maelstrom, which is get a big Earthshock proc. And it takes away from that in order to get a longer dot, and it's really clunky in that situation because when you're playing in a real game, sometimes the Earthshock falls off, but you have 60, or sometimes the Flame Shock falls off and you have 60 Maelstrom and you need to reapply the Flame Shock, but you don't want to waste your Maelstrom. And that's just I feel that it's a poor trade-off whenever I should just be able to Flame Shock for free, not have it generate or spend any Maelstrom, and then also last for 15 seconds. And it's my job as a skilled player to keep Flame Shock up on multiple targets with a 15-second duration. I feel like that's part of the fun of Elemental Shaman, and I don't necessarily believe that I should have to spend Maelstrom in order to keep it longer up there, especially when Flame Shock can just be dispelled, So with that being said, let's jump into Frost Shock and why I also disagree with the whole spending and generating Maelstrom with this ability. I feel that Frost Shock has never, ever in the entire game been an ability that is supposed to do a crazy amount of damage, similar to how a huge Pyroblast would be, right? Or a huge Lava Burst would be. And with this talent called Ice Fury, they're trying to change Frost Shock into a huge damage ability. And what this does is a 1.65 second cast. It hurls a decent amount of damage, like a very like lesser in terms of like lava burst comparisons. It does less damage than lava burst, and then it empowers your next 4 frost shocks to do 400% increased damage. Now, what's interesting about this is that with this like high damage Maelstrom type thing, if you flame shock a target and you lava burst them and you get up to 100 Maelstrom, right, and you use an earth shock and with 100 Maelstrom, that actually does more damage than all of these frost shocks, which makes the whole design really pointless. Like, why would I ever cast 5 frost shocks or 4 or 5 frost shocks if I could just cast an earth shock and do all of that damage in that amount of time? You know, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And what I would like to see is, this Ice Fury ability is pretty new on the alpha, and I don't necessarily like the ability because I don't think frost shock should be an ability that is meant to do a crazy amount of damage, especially since the slow is one of the weaker slows in the game compared to, like, you know, just better 70% slows or whatever. So I would like to see both Flame Shock and Frost Shock not generate nor spend any Maelstrom, and Earth Shock and Heals be the only things that spend Maelstrom, while Lava Shock and Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning are the ones who generate Maelstrom. I think that makes a lot more sense for the class. It gives you a pretty clear purpose of what you're supposed to do, and it also plays in the minigame of keeping those Flame Shocks up and whatnot. So with that being said, we're going to move on from damage. We're going to talk a little bit about mobility. There's a new ability called Gust of Wind, which, I mean, is a talent choice, but it's the best of the 3 talents. It's basically a disengage, which is new for shamans. It's like a disengage, but it goes forward, and it's a 15-second cooldown, so it's like a weaker blink or something that doesn't take you out of stuns. Cool, you know, you get a little bit of mobility. Shamans have really lacked that in previous expansions, so that's really not bad. You keep Ghost Wolf, which increases your speed by 30%, but since there's no glyphs anymore, there's no glyph of Ghost Wolf, so you know, it's not as effective really in most arena games that I've played. What's interesting though is that while without PvP talents, Elemental Shamans aren't very strong in PvP, obviously. With them, they have something called Lightning Lasso, and this does a stun for 6 seconds. It's a channeled 6-second stun, which is pretty crazy, and deals an amount of damage over an amount of time, but you can be interrupted while casting this stun. So while it has a 30-second cooldown, I think that this is going to be the most important ability for shamans in the entire, you know, PvP landscape, is this Lightning Lasso, because it's basically like a deep freeze that you channel, and it does a lot of damage. I think it's like 5 times the amount of a lava burst damage over 6 seconds, which is pretty crazy. Obviously you can't cast anymore while you're casting this Lightning Lasso, and it's just a very interesting ability. So that's why I think that Lightning Lasso will be the most important ability of the Elemental Shaman tree. I don't have it because it's the very last talent in the tree, but I imagine that when I get to test it out, it'll really bring up the power of Elemental Shamans very high, because right now it's really not that strong without PvP talents in general, because a lot of these talents really boost Shaman to be not just like a high DPS class for PvE, but brings it to PvP, right? So moving on from that, let's talk a little bit about defensives. You have Earth Grab Totem, so Earth Grab Totem is pretty much the same as it's always been, except you can cast it as a target location as opposed to just on you. So it just roots targets, and it's a 30-second cooldown. That's fine. I mean, you know, whatever. It's a 30-second cooldown, roots targets for 5 seconds repeatedly, and is a totem. So pretty solid shaman ability. No really complaints with that. You have Thunderstorm, 45-second cooldown. Nothing's really changed with that. Still knocks back targets. There's a PvP talent that makes it so you can cast Thunderstorm on allies, which I don't think you would be taking this one over Lightning Lasso. Lightning Lasso is pretty crazy. And then you have Astral Shift. Astral Shift is a good ability, 40% less damage for 6 seconds. I'm cool with that. It's a 1.5 minute cooldown. The only issue with it is just that you cannot cast it while stunned or silenced. And there's a lot of arguments based on like whether you should have to Astral Shift before you get stunned and that makes you a pro player, or you should, you know, just have Astral Shift. I think since it's a 6-second ability with a 1.5 minute cooldown, I really don't see the problem with having it while stunned. I think that there's a lot of points of weakness throughout games where you won't have Astral Shift if it's a 1.5 minute cooldown, and I really don't feel like 6 seconds punishes an enemy too much to where it becomes unhealthy for the game, especially since this is the only defensive cooldown that Shamans have outside of like Gust of Wind, which throws them forward. Earth Grab Totem, and then like Maelstrom Totem, or I mean Earthquake Totem, which like has a chance to knock people down. You know, I really think that Shamans are geared more towards the offensive side of the game and really haven't been too focused on durable, because I mean, that's just how Shamans have always been. They've always been like this target that you can train, which is fine. And one more thing that I really want to bring up, because this doesn't make any sense at all in terms of like balancing compared to other hybrids like a Shadow Priest, is the fact that Healing Surge, it's a really long casted ability. I have 20% haste and it's a 1.65 second cast, which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because it heals for 96,000. And I've played Shadow Priest on the alpha for a while now, and Shadow Priest, like, they have something called Shadow Mend, which is the exact same amount of healing as Healing Surge, but it's a 1.5 second cooldown, or 1.5 second cast time base, which means that it can reduce to like 1.3 seconds. So on my Shadow Priest in the same gear, it's a 1.3 second cast, as opposed to my Shaman, which has more haste and the same gear, and it's a 1.65 second cast. I think that Healing Surge as Elemental should be baseline 1.5 seconds. I think that's fair, and it's really hard to get any of these Healing Surge casts off an arena for the multiple times that I have, you know, actually tried. So that's all of my thoughts really for Elemental Shaman, guys. I hope you guys did enjoy, and if you did, please be sure to give a thumbs up, and you can also subscribe to my channel for future content. I put a lot of my thoughts out there for Elemental Shaman. I think that it's a great class, but just needs a little bit of tweaking in terms of the Frost Shock and Flame Shock, Maelstrom spending, the Healing Surge, and, you know, just maybe the Astral Shift being able to be casted while stunned and silenced. So hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, be sure to give that thumbs up, and I will see you guys in the next video. Cartoons out.